Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu meiner English, Michael. English. Remember, you're doing this in English. Okay, let's start again. Hello everyone and welcome to my little corner of the internet. My name is Michael and I'm bitten by radioactive book. As you've probably recognized, I have been a little bit absent in the last couple of months. So I was doing a lot of TV show watching and gaming, and I didn't take a real break from reading, but I wasn't reading that much, so I didn't finish a lot of books, and mostly when I'm out of the reading mood, I'm also out of the filming mood, so that rested a little bit. It seems to be usual for me, so I did this the year before as well, but now as the summer comes to a close, hopefully we'll have a little bit more of it. Yeah, I'm getting more and more back into the reading mood, and so yeah, without further ado, I want to present to you my June and July wrap-up. First off, that's always a great start. I start with a book that I'm not going to talk about. And why is that? It's Nightshadow by Sebastian de Castell. And I can only say I really enjoyed it and I gave it 4 stars, but I actually got this already last year as a review copy, and therefore I owe it to the publisher and the author to do a separate review video for it, and that will be coming up soon. Next up we have The Vagrant by Peter Newman. This was a very exciting read. I only rated it 3 stars in the end because it was a little bit all over the place, but that was also the charm of it. It was very unique. It's kind of a science fantasy, so it seems to be a post-apocalyptic fantasy world. So you have many technological elements in it as well, but the apocalypse seems to be brought by demons, so there are a lot of like spiritual demon creatures that are possessing people, but in telling that I'm not doing it any justice, because it's not like a real possession. There are demons that have like spirits that are too big enough to be contained with one human host, and so they put this into a lot of different humans or a lot of beings and creating really strange and really unique creatures. It is yeah, very imaginative. It has an excellent world building. It has many unique ideas. The protagonist is a mute, and he carries around a sword and a baby, and nobody knows why. And so it's for the reader to find out with a few little flashback scenes how it actually came to be, and of course follow him on his adventure. And as I said, it's not without its flaws. It is very like complex and very difficult in terms of getting to know who are these people, who does the world really function. So it's not an easy read, but definitely very rewarding, and I'm going to read the second book in the series this month as well. Next up we have The United States of Japan by Peter Tirias. It is a spiritual follow-up to The Man in the High Castle, and it has the same basic idea, like the Axis powers won World War II. The US is like split up between Nazi Germany and Japan, and we're in the Japanese controlled part of the country, and we're, I think, in modern times. I'm not sure actually, and there is like a video game coming out, which is about how the war could have ended if the US had won, or something a little bit like this, or to see the war maybe from a US perspective and how the US could have won. And we're following like 2 characters, a censor and an agent that yeah, are trying to find out things about this video game. You see, I have to be really vague. I don't want to spoil anything about the story, but it's definitely interesting alternate reality. When you look at the cover, and that is maybe my main complaint, and maybe my main complaint is my expectation. I did this as a buddy read with Silke, who is a very dear friend of mine, a German reader, and we both had the feeling from the cover that that could be like an action rom kind of thing, but actually the book took itself and the issue really serious, and is therefore like in the line of great classical dystopian novels like Brave New World or The Man in the High Castle or 1984. And you learn a lot about like oppressive countries, how difficult it is to live in a society where you can't speak freely, where you always have to live in fear that your neighbor may report you to the authorities for a minor slip up, and that is something that the book is really good at. And if you are interested in something like that, or if you have not been exposed to something like that, the effect the book might have will be very good, I think. Unfortunately, for both of us, as we were both Germans reading it, we have a history of like having grandparents who grew up within Nazi Germany and have lived in a world where Germany was split, and in the eastern part they had a second oppressive regime as well. And so our history, and therefore also our school lessons, were filled with examples of that. So the effect it had on me and Silke was not the same that it might have on a reader who has never been exposed to something like this. So I rated it 3 stars in the end, because it was like just a good kind of story that I enjoyed, and it had yeah, the tendency to make you think, but it didn't have the effect I had anticipated for it. Now we're moving into July already. The first book I finished there was Hope and Red by John Scovron. This is something I thoroughly enjoyed. 4-star read for me. It's in the wake of Michael J. Sullivan and Scott Lynch. We're following 2 main protagonists. Hope, a girl who trains to be a knight, and Red, a guy who trains to be like a thief or pirate. And we are following both of their stories, and then see how the stories come together around the halfway point, and yeah, see how they intertwine. And this book was just a lot of fun. What I really enjoyed is the structure, because that might be something that is off-putting for some people, but what the author does is he shows us our 2 main characters when they are children, and he tells what is important about them, and then when they are entering like a training montage, he skips like 3 or 4 years and then has them back again as young adults, tells his story again, and then skips another few years, and then when they meet up in the end, they're both adults. And I really enjoyed that, because he could have written like a trilogy just by what happens in this book, and have all like the training things drawn out. And I know there are a lot of readers who like that, but I personally, I've read so many of these coming of age training montage stories that I was really glad that John Scovron didn't do that and just stuck with the story. And the book is awesome. The next book I finished was Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan, and as you expect of Michael J. Sullivan, it was a really good, accessible action-adventure book, which has a deep history in his world, where the Rhyria series are located as well, but it tells the ancient history of the world, I think about 3,000 years ago. It has a lot of elements of northern mythology in it, so a lot of the mythology of this world is a little bit related to Northern mythology. If you know your Northern mythology, you will spot a lot of like little nods to the hat maybe to this. Yeah, overall it was a really enjoyable book. I rated it 4 stars. It wasn't a 5-star for me because I have one like style issue with Michael J. Sullivan that I always have, because he in most of his books, and this is no exception, he starts off really fast for the first third of the book, and it is actiony, and there's a lot of banter, and you get to know the characters, and then he always slows down. And he opens up new characters, new points of views. The story gets more complex, and normally, as you know me, I like complex stories, but I like my complex stories to be complex right from the get-go. And what Michael J. Sullivan then always does, after being so fast and then going slow, then it always annoys me a little bit and brings me out of the reading pace, because the pacing then yeah, is just much slower. And overall, as I said, nothing that will deduct a lot from the book for me. It was still a 4-star read and I enjoyed it, but that is something that yeah, I think it's his style, because you will recognize it from a lot of his books, and that is maybe the only thing about his writing that doesn't work that well for me. But the rest, perfectly entertaining book, great start to the series, really looking forward to the next one. Next up, we have the odd one out a little bit. We have The Dinosaur Waltz by Victor Milan, a book I was really looking forward to last year when it came out, but never got around to read it. Terrific cover, the basic idea of the George R. R. Martin blurb. It's like a Game of Thrones meets Jurassic Park. That intrigued me a lot. And overall, it isn't a bad book, but I felt totally disconnected from it. I don't know what it is, but I didn't get that much into the characters. They were just like a little bit bland for me. The world building feels like Europe, and the countries are called very similar. He is very adamant in the beginning, before actually the book starts, to tell you this is not Earth, this is something different, this is something called paradise, and this is not an alternate Earth, and something like that. And yeah, but it just feels like an alternate Europe. And yeah, overall, I think I'm going to continue with the story. Yes, I already bought the second book, so I will at some point, but I wasn't really gripped by it. It was a 2-star read for me. It was okay, but nothing that I really enjoyed. Next up, we have another book that I'm going to have a separate review video for. It's The Creation Machine by Andrew Bannister, where I actually got the physical art copy off, and so that was weird, reading a physical book. I think the first physical book I've read in 6 years or something like that. So that was interesting in itself, and yeah, it was very enjoyable, also highly imaginative, 4-star read for me, but we will talk more in depth about it in a separate review video. Next up, we have Exiled by R.R. Salvatore. It's the second installment in his Dark Elf trilogy. Drizzt Do'Urden is the main character, and I don't want to spoil the first book, but after the events of the first book, Drizzt is a little bit is isolated and out of the Dark Elf society, and yeah, is on his own and tries to survive in the Underdark, the underworld of the Forgotten Realms. In contrast to the first book, this book is a little bit more on the action side, a little bit less on the character development, because I think Drizzt's character was very well established in the first book, and we just see him yeah, we would expect him to be the main character aspect maybe is that he makes friendships within the book. That is like very interesting. But as I said, it has way more action elements than the first book, and a little bit less of world building. We see interesting new things of the Underdark, but one thing that really drew me in the first book was how all the Dark Elves political scheming in Menzoberranzan, their capital city, was like portrayed, and we have that in this one as well, but not with the same amount of time dedicated to it. So overall, it was a very enjoyable 3-star read for me, and I'm going to continue with the series this month. Next up, we have a very, very pleasant surprise. It's Seven Forges by James A. Moore, the first installment in a Seven Forges series. This is a book I knew next to nothing about, but bought the first 4 books in the series because I'm a crazy person when it comes to buying books, as we know. Yeah, but overall that was a very interesting story. It's basically a clash of cultures in an interesting way, because normally in fantasy, when 2 cultures encounter each other, they like immediately go to war, or there's a misunderstanding, or there is just a reason, or there's just good versus evil. But in this book, we actually have like a more human-like culture, and they are exploring the far north, and they meet up with kind of barbaric warrior culture of very huge humanoids. They hide their faces. You can see that on the cover as well, and they're mysterious. And like the whole first book is about how these cultures meet up, different characters from both cultures, and yeah, how differently they have a way of life and see the other culture. And yeah, that is like very, very interesting. Then there is like a huge twist at the end of the book, and that came in a very surprising way for me. And so I'm really looking forward to read the second installment this month. Next up, we have A Natural History of Dragons, the first installment in Mary Brannan's The Memories of Lady Trent series. This was my 5th try to say that right. And it basically tells the memoirs of Lady Trent, surprisingly. And she is like a female scientist who is very into dragons. So this is a fantasy world, but this is very reminiscent of Victorian or Edwardian England. And we see the struggle of a female scientist to be accepted in society, accepted by her husband, by peers, by people around her, that she wants to get into the field. And we see basically her history, how her love for dragons came to be, her childhood. We see then her first like adventure, where she really could go on a kind of expedition to look for dragons. And basically it's really more a book about female empowerment, I would say, and not that much about dragons. And maybe that was I expected it a little bit more 50-50-ish, and therefore I was like entertained, and the ideas of feminism were portrayed really, really well. But apart from that, the book fell a little bit flat for me. I wasn't really rooting for Lady Trent. It was like I didn't have the feeling there was much of an overall story arc or real plot existing. So yeah, it was entertaining. It had its intellectual merits. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't like a read where I'm like super excited about. So I rated it 3 stars, and yeah, I'm not going to continue with the series at this point. Maybe it is a series where I read a book a year or something like that. We'll see. And last but not least, we have Black Dog by K.V. Johansson. It's the first book in her... No, actually, it's not the first book in her series. It's the first book in her world. It's a standalone, but there are more books that are set in this world. She has another duology out in this world, and a new book coming up this September. But this is like the first book set in her world, and it's a very, very interesting world, complex world building. We have a world that has a lot of elements of Eastern Asian and Arabic cultures, and a very interesting blend, because the people have gods. The gods are like very active, but are more portrayed in a Japanese Tanto kind of fashion. Like every river has its god, every mountain has its god, and they are all minor gods, and the old great gods are somehow gone from the world after a fight with the 7 devils. And some of the 7 devils are rumored to still run around. And for the 7 devils to be able to be in this world, they had to bind their souls to like 7 sorcerers. You can see this is like very complex, and even with the gods and the minor gods, we have like constant rebirth. The gods are taking over avatar bodies, living for a long amount of time, and it has a little bit of a feeling of a tickle of the Malazan world, because same as there, you have like over the top powerful beings, yeah, going through the land alone on their own with agendas that have come to be over hundreds or thousands of years, and that is very, very interesting and gives it an epic scope. But in its heart, it still tells like a coming-of-age story of one of the goddesses that has to flee from her actual home, because when her temple is attacked, she is too young to be in her full powers, and this goddess is hidden by her bodyguard, and the bodyguard is the Black Dog. And the Black Dog is a kind of immortal creature that also always changes hosts. So when one of the Black Dog's hosts dies, he searches for a new protector to protect the goddess, and so they live on over the centuries. And but the interesting thing in this world is that these powerful beings never overtake the people completely. So each new host of the goddesses and of the Black Dog has still their own kind of memories, and they are still themselves. They just have like the knowledge and the urges and the instincts of these powerful beings inside them. It's very, very interesting and very complex. You need a little bit of work to get into it and get to it, because sometimes the naming is like they have a normal name, then they have their like goddess and demon name or something like that, then the character name they maybe originally had when the creatures bonded with them, then they have nicknames used by friends, and so sometimes it's like you have to pay close attention to who is actually acting right now. And there were a few moments where I thought like, oh, there were about 4 characters, but in the end there were just 2 of them, and they just all had so many names they called themselves with. But yeah, overall this is a very, very exciting world. I really look forward to read the first book in her duology, The Leopard, next month, and it was a 4-star read for me, and it's highly recommended. So that's it for this wrap up. Wow, this was an immense wrap up. I hope you enjoyed it, and it doesn't matter that it was so long, but I was gone for quite a long time, so hopefully I will make up a little bit of time with it. Yeah, stay tuned. We will have videos. I don't know. I don't want to promise anything I can't keep. We will have videos now more constantly, but I don't want to stick to a kind of schedule. There will be a TBR for August because I have so many interesting things lined up, and we will have the reviews, the individual reviews, and I was tagged a few times, and I have still some tag videos to film. I bought books as well while I was gone, so there will be a book haul coming your way. Yeah, so lots of interesting things coming up on my channel over the next couple of weeks. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more of me, subscribe to my channel. And until next time, I hope you get bitten by a really good book too. Bye.